All right, students, welcome to class Monday morning. Liesl, can you hear us?
I sure can.
Okay, so we have on with using Skype technology, we have Liesl. I'll let her tell you all more about herself and the work that she's done and where she's at right now, and about what she's going to talk about, which is the American pika, which lives in what life zone? Alpine. Can you say that nice and loud? Liesl can hear us through a microphone right here.
Alpine?
Did you hear that?
Yes, I did.
Okay, so yeah, I guess without any further ado, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Liesl. I know you're having a hard time seeing. I'll try to move the camera around so you can see the students a little better if needed, and we can turn lights on or whatever is necessary.
Sounds good. And Jamie, one quick question, two questions. If you could just field questions for me, that'd be fantastic. Anybody should feel free to ask questions as we go along. And also, is it going to work to show some of those PowerPoint slides?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I'm sorry, I actually kind of need to get that loaded up here.
So if you click on my...
So I'll start talking if you want to work on that.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, sounds good. Well, hi everybody, my name is Liesl. I'm currently a professor at Western State Colorado University, which is in Gunnison, not too far away from you guys. And I'll tell you a little bit about how I got here and how I became a scientist, because I think it's important to know that story. I'm originally from Idaho. You guys know where that is? What are some neighbor states to Idaho? Anybody know?
Yeah.
I'll give you a hint. It's not corn. It's potatoes.
We've got one answer over here. What?
Wyoming?
Wyoming?
Yeah, Wyoming. Absolutely. And Oregon, Washington, Montana, Utah. So we almost meet Idaho here in Colorado, but not quite. So I grew up there, and Idaho's a great place to live if you like the outdoors, just like Colorado is. You're able to get out and hike and see the mountains, see the lakes, see all sorts of outdoor beauty. So I grew up really loving nature and loving animals. And I first came to Colorado to go to Colorado College, which is a college in Colorado Springs, where I was a biology major, and I got to go on all sorts of field trips and study things there. And then I was able to do some other work. I went up to Montana to study grizzly bears. I moved back east for a little bit and worked for the National Zoo in Washington, D.C., and got to work with deer and all sorts of other animals out there. But I really wanted to come back to the mountains, and so I came back to do my graduate school, which is the school you do after you've gotten a college degree. For me, I wanted to teach at the college level, and to do that you have to have more than a college degree. And so I went back to get my PhD, which is how you get the doctor in front of your name if you're a biologist. So I'm not a doctor that can fix you, but I'm a doctor that's trying to maybe help fix the environment. So I got that degree from University of Colorado in Boulder last year, and now I'm teaching at Western State. So how are we doing on the PowerPoint?
Liesl, yeah, we're doing great. We have it up. We're kind of watching you in the corner of the screen, and we have the PowerPoint on the full screen here.
Fantastic. Okay. So everybody can now see the pika. Who's seen a pika in real life? Anybody? Nobody. So aren't they cute? They're really cute little guys. Excuse me, I'm a little bit sick. They're very cute little guys. That's a pika right there. This picture was taken by a professor at the University of Colorado. And there's my email. If you guys ever have questions later on that you want to contact me, you can use that email to get in touch with me. So let's talk a little bit about pikas and why we might be worried about them in the face of changing climate. First, I want you, especially because so few of you have seen them in the wild, I want you to know a few things about pikas. Pikas it's a funny word, but they're what we call lagomorphs. That means they're related to rabbits and hares. So we call them sometimes a rock rabbit. Because you can see in the picture here, they live in rock habitats, and I'll talk more about that in a second. But they live in those rock habitats, and they're closely related to rabbits. But what do you guys notice that are some differences between these guys and rabbits?
Yeah, over here.
That they have, like, they're smaller than each other. The pike is smaller than the rabbit.
Did you hear that?
I only heard part of it. What
Okay.
was that?
He said that pikas are smaller than rabbits.
Okay. Yeah, they are. There are some rabbit species that are called pygmy rabbits that are about the size of a pika, but most pikas are much smaller than rabbits. That's good.
Okay, over here.
Their ears are thicker and smaller.
Yeah, that's funny, right? Because the first thing you think about with a rabbit is probably Bugs Bunny teeth and big ears, right? Now these guys definitely do have the big teeth. We can't see them in this picture, but they are missing the big long ears. So we need to think about why rabbits have big ears. The first obvious thing might be because they can hear, but another thing, can you think of, can anybody picture a jackrabbit that lives in the desert that has huge ears? Have you guys ever seen one of those in the wild? Huge big ears in the desert. Why might a big, why might a rabbit need really big ears in the desert?
How about over here?
To keep them cool. It helps.
To keep them cool. Why? How does that work? That's very good.
So,
Anybody?
The sun might, well, the ears might shade itself so that the sun isn't just hitting the point.
I didn't hear that.
So I think what she said was that that the sun, that the ears provide some shade for the rabbit.
Gotcha. They do a little bit, and they also work a lot like a dog's tongue. You know how a dog, when it gets really hot, it pants, right? And have you ever noticed that the hotter the dog is, like they widen their tongue out and it becomes huge? The reason they're doing that is, you know how you have veins and arteries in your body that carry blood around? Every living animal has that too. And in the case of a dog, they have a lot of those veins and arteries in their tongue, and they can bring air across the tongue and it cools their blood down. Same way with rabbit ears. They have huge veins and arteries in their ears, and when air goes past it, it cools their blood down. So they're trying to stay cool with those giant ears. Why would a pika not need to stay cool?
Yeah, right here.
Because it lives in the snow, so it used to stay warmer instead of cooler.
Exactly.
Cooler air.
Its problem is not staying cool, though we'll talk about that actually can be a problem for them. It's mostly staying warm. The other thing I want to ask you guys, in the middle of winter when you go outside, what parts of your body get cold fastest?
Like your face and your legs.
Your face and your legs?
Jacob?
What else? What parts of those?
Your feet and your hands and your ears.
Your feet, your hands, and your ears. Absolutely. So, your fingers and your ears are very sensitive to cold temperatures. Pikas, if they have really long ears, and they lived, because they live in these cold areas, if they had really long ears, they'd get frostbite on those ears. So they have nice little tidy, smaller Mickey Mouse ears, we call them. Another funny thing about pikas, has anybody seen The Hobbit? Anybody? Maybe a couple. What do hobbits have on the bottom of their feet? Anybody know?
Austin.
Hair.
Yeah, they do have hair. They have hair between their toes and on the bottom of their feet. Pikas do too. Pikas, if you zoom into their paws, have hair all in between their toes to keep them nice and warm, because it can get so cold up there. So pikas are really built for the cold of the alpine, and we'll talk more about that in a second. So if you switch to the next slide where it says not a rodent.
Okay.
Has anybody seen the animal on the left? No, maybe.
I have a question.
Anybody know what it is?
Up there.
A woodchuck.
A woodchuck. Very good. Did you know that a woodchuck and a rock chuck and a groundhog and a marmot are all pretty much the same thing? So Groundhog Day, when the groundhog comes up over in Pennsylvania and looks to see his shadow, that's the same thing as the animal on the left. They're all very close cousins of each other. It's called a marmot. What I want you to realize is that a lot of people get marmots and pikas, the pika's on the right there, of course, confused. But when you look at them, the thing on the left is the size of a football. The marmot is the size of a football. The pika is the size of a potato. A baked potato, okay? So football, potato, and you can see the weight at the bottom. A marmot can be anywhere from 4 to 12 pounds, whereas a pika is less than half a pound. So they're very different. And there are some important differences between these two. The biggest thing is that marmots living in the alpine have honestly the good sense to go to sleep for 9 months of the year, 8 months of the year. They go underneath the rocks. They also live in rocks like pikas. They go under the rocks and they hibernate for much of the year. If we switch to the next slide, you'll see that pikas do not hibernate. Now the thing about pikas is that they eat plants. What do we call that? An herbivore. Very good. They're an herbivore. What's the problem with being an herbivore in the alpine, do you think?
Kill.
There's not a lot of vegetation up there because it's so cold.
Yeah, there isn't a lot of vegetation in the first place. And then snow covers it up, right? And plants can't photosynthesize or keep growing when they're covered with snow because there's no light for them to grow, right? So in the winter, there's very little food for a pika. That's a problem, but they figured out a way around it. And what they do is they collect plants or vegetation in what we call hay piles. So you know how farmers, anybody have farmers in your family? Yeah. You know how farmers grow hay all summer long and then they cut it and they put it into bales, right? And then they store it in their barn in the winter that they can feed to their animals all year long? Pikas do that for themselves. The reason we call it a hay pile is they collect plants, and just like a farmer would put that hay in a barn, they put the hay in a hay pile in the rocks for themselves. What you can see here are a bunch of the different kinds of plants that pikas eat. They're actually what we call diet generalists. They're a generalist, meaning they'll eat any kind of plant you give them. Okay? But there are some plants that they like better than others, and just like you, there are plants they like better and some that are better for you than others, right? So you can eat chips all day or you can eat a salad. One of them is better for you, right? One might taste a little better to you too, but for a pika, it's mostly about surviving and getting all the nutrients that they need. So if you hit it again, you should see a picture of a guy standing next to a hay pile. That's my dad down there. He's on Kennebec Pass, which is just south of you guys, kind of west of Durango. And what you can see here is that one little potato-sized animal can collect a lot of hay. When you start to actually look in this picture, there isn't just the hay right next to my dad. This is my dad, by the way. There isn't just hay right there and the rocks behind it. There's hay all over the place. And that all belongs to a single pika. So the pika collects plants so that it can feed off them all winter long. If you go to the next slide, you'll see another example of a pika on the left and its whole huge hay pile on the right. It's amazing, isn't it? That's a lot of food for one little guy. But if you think about it, if you had to stock your pantry and your refrigerator for 8 months, think of how much food you would need, right? Another thing to know, I think I had you guys learn what the fun word is, coprophagy or coprophagic. Anybody remember what that meant?
Any hands?
Yeah. Does it mean that you eat your own food?
Did you hear that?
They eat their own poop. Yeah. Now, why on earth would you do that?
CJ.
You get more nutrients.
Exactly. So have you ever seen horse poop? You know how it kind of looks like grass just clumped together? Well, horse poop, horses have really, really inefficient, kind of bad digestive systems. They have to eat a lot of food because when they eat it, they don't get very much out of it when it goes through their stomach. A pika can't take that risk. There isn't that much food where they live, so they need to be coprophagic so they can get all the nutrients possible out of every bit of food that they eat. And so that's one of the things that they do. They'll eat this hay pile and they'll eat it a second time after it's come through them once. So that's kind of a crazy thing that pikas do. So they make these big hay piles, and you can see in all these pictures, pikas are living in rocks. If we switch to the next slide, you'll see an example of a good rock slope where pikas might live. Pikas, one of the reasons you might not have seen them is pikas have to live here in Colorado at high elevations. As you said, the alpine life zone. They actually sometimes come down into subalpine and montane, but they're not as common down in there. So they live everywhere from montane to alpine, but they're happiest up in the alpine because they're adapted for cold, right? All those things we talked about, the shorter ears, the fuzzy feet, all that stuff. But, so they tend to live at high elevations. In Colorado, that means usually above 9,000 feet, though we find them every once in a while a little lower, but above 9,000 feet. What's crazy is up in Canada, and even in Washington and Oregon, because it's cooler and rainier there, they can actually live at sea level up there. But here in Colorado, our lowest elevations get kind of deserty, right? We get kind of the scrub, the sagebrush and the scrublands, things like that. Pikas can't live in that kind of habitat. It's too dry and hot for them. So they tend to stick above 9,000 feet. In habitat like this, talus, the word that's there on the screen, means these broken rock slopes. A rock slope that has big rocks that are maybe 6 inches or bigger. Now, why do you think they like rock slopes that have big rocks instead of little rocks, if you're going to live in that habitat?
Cheyenne.
More protection.
Protection, absolutely. The little rocks, they can't really tunnel in between them very well, but big rocks have big spaces in between them, so the pikas can go in among them and hide underneath. That helps them hide from predators. If you go to the next slide, you'll see examples of that. Yeah. So mostly weasels and things in the weasel family are the top predators of pikas. But some hawks and owls will catch pikas too. The most common thing are weasels. You've got a pine marten on the right there, but they're all relatives of weasels. So if we actually go back to the previous slide again, the talus slope in the lake, you'll see the rocks provide protection from predators, but they also provide protection from the heat. Here's the thing about pikas. We've described all these things that they have going for them that make them protected against cold. But in the summer, it can get really hot in the alpine too. It can get over 80 degrees on the surface. The problem for pikas is if it gets over 78 degrees Fahrenheit, they can actually overheat. If they don't get out of that heat, they can overheat and have a heat stroke and die in temperatures over 78 degrees. That's pretty crazy, isn't it? That's very cold. I mean, I don't know how hot it gets necessarily in Norwood, but where I live, it certainly gets to be 90, so that's pretty tough for a pika to deal with. Let me ask you this, in the hot heat of the summer, what part of your house would you want to be in? Do you want to be in the attic or the basement in the summer? Why? Because it's, less heat, heat rises, and it's cooler in the basement. That's very good. Well, pikas don't have houses with basements, but they do have this rock slope that they can live in. And all the cold air sinks underneath those rocks, and it acts like a basement. It can be sometimes up to 30 degrees colder underneath the rocks than it is on the surface. So even if it's 90 degrees on the surface, they may be okay if they can go under the rocks and cool off, because it might be 60 degrees down there. That makes sense? Okay, so They are very sensitive to high temperatures, and sometimes they have to spend a lot of their time under the rocks. Tell me this, can anybody think of a reason it would be bad for a pika to spend all summer under the rocks?
Zoe, Trulock?
They wouldn't be able to collect food.
Very good. What they're supposed to be doing in the